Hey, what's up? Justin from Make Supply here. Today's video is another supplemental video for the upcoming bag series. Today we're going to discuss a method for accurately determining how long your gusset needs to be for making pouches like this, or even full-size messenger bags or anything like that. And then also how to accurately pre-punch all of your holes on the body parts and the gusset so that when you stitch it, it comes out with a nice, even, good-looking stitch. There is a printout for this. If you want to go in the link, there's a link in the description below if you want to follow along and try out this pattern design. And let's get started. Okay, so for this example, we're going to use a small, basic pouch design. Just two pieces and then a cut gusset, which I'll explain in a minute. So marked here on the template is just the center line, the vertical center line of the design. It's on both here. And then a suggested 1/8 inch stitch groove line. And that's also on this part. So to save some time, I already cut out the pieces here. So this one is for this one is for this. And then I cut a 2-inch wide strip of leather, which is going to be the gusset. It's extremely long. It's much longer than we're going to be using for the project. We're going to cut it down as we figure out what the overall length needs to be. So I've experimented with a bunch of different methods for not only getting the overall length of the gusset correct, but also making it so all of your pre-punched stitching holes are equally distributed on both sides. And I've come to the conclusion that the center out method is the best way to do it consistently. I've tried using measurements on the computer and all kind of stuff, and I just find that this is the most accurate way of doing it. So that's what we're going to use for our example here. So the center out method is exactly how it sounds. Basically, we will be starting by marking our stitching holes from the center bottom of the front panel of your design, also on your back lid here, and then also of your gusset. And then you're going to be working from the center out, marking your holes. This way, you know for absolute certain that you will have the equal amount of holes needed on both sides. If you've ever tried to start from a corner and mark pre-punch all your stitching holes and then start on the corner of your gusset, I'll use this side, it's better, and then start walking down, pre-punching all your holes, unless you are extremely accurate, I mean, basically right on the millimeter accurate, eventually even small incorrect markings are going to develop into you probably having more holes on either your gusset or your front panel than you need to have. It's not always going to be equal. So doing it this way will make it equal. So the first step is to mark your 1/8 inch stitching line all the way around your piece here. Okay. So now that we have our stitching groove marked, we need to find the center point down at the bottom here. So being that I have this template printed out and I already know what the vertical center line is, it's a little bit easier, but say you don't have a printed out template, you're just using something you made based off of paper or something else. So you're going to then measure the overall width of your piece. So mine is 7.5 inches. So I'll just write it on here. So 7.5 width. Okay? So you're going to want to split that in half, obviously, to get the center. So half of 7.5, 3.75. And then that would give you where you should measure to mark your hole here. So I'm just going to put this on top of here. Just like that. And mark the center point. just like that. So that is the center line of our piece. Okay, so before we pre-punch our holes, I want to go over how we get the gusset length. And when doing this, I mean, there's nothing worse than thinking you have the gusset correct, the gusset length, and then it ends up being shorter. And then you've already put it together, and then you're missing like a ½ inch or something. It's awful. So I always like to overshoot. And the easiest way to make sure you overshoot is to take the entire length of this outside piece and use that to cut your gusset. So here's how I do that. I will take a piece of thread and then measure from, and then run it along the edge down to the center point here. You don't have to go all the way around. Obviously, you can just double what it is to the center point, and that'll be the overall length. So I take a piece of string and I hold it. I'm trying to get this on the camera without blocking here. Basically, I just hold it to the edge, real snug against the side, and work it all the way around. Until I get to the center. Just like that. Okay? And then from there, I'll just cut the thread. And that is half the length of our overall piece. And then you're going to go ahead and measure that. Okay, so mine came out to roughly 9 1/8. At this point, you'd want to round up to be safe. So 9 1/8, I'll just do 9 1/4 just to make it easy. So then, obviously, to get double that, 9 1/4 times 2 is 18 1/2. And cutting, and then you will go ahead and cut an 18 1/2 inch long gusset. And that will overshoot the ends here by a little bit, usually by like 3/4 of an inch or so on each side. And then when we're done, we'll trim it. So go ahead and then measure out a 18 1/2 inch gusset. Okay, so now we have our 3 pieces. Go ahead and mark your stitching line also on your gusset. Now on your gusset, you're going to do the same thing, finding the center point. So let me put this back over here. So I'm lining up on my mat here, and I know that half of 18 1/2 is 9.25. And then I'm going to mark that right on the stitching line as my center point, my center hole point, on both sides. All right, so 9.25 right here. Hole, hole. Now we have the center part marked on our gusset, also our front panel, and now you're going to do the same exact thing on the back panel. Find your half point. Just like that. Okay, so here comes the fun of pre-punching all of your holes. We're going to start with the front panel always. The gusset is the least important because it's just a straight line and we're going to be trimming it anyway. So we're going to start with our panel here because it has a heart out for how many holes. Obviously here's the end of the piece and you can't go any further than this, so this is the exact amount of holes we want to have. Now what you're going to do is you're going to either use your stitching wheel or your stitching chisels or whatever, like we're going to use these stitching chisels here, and starting at the middle hole that you mark there as your first hole, you're going to slowly walk and mark your holes all the way up both sides. I like to do this in a very OCD way where I will do one side, and I'll do that all the way to the end just to make sure I have the same amount of holes on both sides. Because if you do this incorrectly, you can still end up with like 35 holes on this side and 36 holes on this side. I've done it. I did it when I was practicing this for this project. So starting at that hole, I'm just going to start hand pressure walking down my stitching line. But I'm going to alternate. So that side and then this side. And whatever I do on the one side, I do on the other side. Like that time, since I'm hitting the curve here, I added just one more hole. And on this side, same thing, one more hole. Now I'm moving to the two prong to continue walking. I'm going to do the same exact thing, side to side. Okay, now that I'm back at a straight section here, I'm going to go back to my 6 prong. Okay, so that's the last punch on this side. Now I'm hoping that I did this accurately and this will be the last punch on this side. So I'm a certified brain genius and forgot to turn on my microphone for the next couple clips, so I'm just going to do a voiceover for what I was talking about in this section. So I just finished marking all of my holes, and now I want to go back and verify that I have the equal number on both sides. So by doing that, I'm going to use this pen here and count off by 10. So every 10 holes, I'm going to mark a line, and then I'm going to make sure that I have the same amount on both sides. Okay, so I'm about to come up and mark my last dash for 10, and then after that I have 4 holes for a total of 44 holes on the left side. That number will all depend on the prong distance of your pricking iron. So now I'm going to do the same exact thing on the right hand side. Go 10 holes, mark a dash, and then hopefully at the end I have the same amount as I do on the left hand side. And it looks like I do. I have 44 holes on both sides. So if you don't have an equal number of holes on both sides, don't go to the next stage. Go back and walk your hand pressure through again and make sure that it's equal on both sides. So here I went ahead and punched all the stitching holes through. And now we're going to do the same thing on the back panel. So here I'm telling you that you have 2 options. One, you can place this piece over top of your back panel and then mark your center hole, or you can mark even all of the stitching holes if you want using your scratch awl. but I'm going to do it the exact same way as I did the other piece, starting at the center hole and then alternating side to side, marking my stitching holes. Okay, and here is the end of marking the stitching holes on this panel. I started dashing some of my lines as I was working because I thought I was going off course a little bit. So I used the lines to make sure that my holes were even on both sides. Now I'm just checking to make sure everything lines up nice. Okay, now finally we're at the gusset and we're going to do the same exact thing. Find your center point that you marked earlier and then walk out the equal amount of stitching holes for each side. So I had 44 holes on each side. I need to walk out 44 holes to the left and to the right of that center point on both sides. Again, I'm using my pen to mark out every 10 holes and then put a dash to make sure that I am accurately counting. Obviously, you wouldn't want to mark with a pen on it like a production piece, but you can use a piece of tape or a clip or anything like that. So I went ahead and marked all the holes and I lined up all my dashed lines on both sides to make sure it's nice and even. You'll notice that you have a little bit of overhang now from your last hole to the top of the gusset. I believe in this case it was a half of an inch overhang. So now we're going to have to trim that overhang off. Okay, so I went ahead and punched all the holes in the gusset there. Let's see. And now we have all of our stitching holes punched. They should be nice and even. We know we have the correct amount, so now you can rapidly stitch this together to finish it. So to trim the gusset, since our gusset is still a little bit too long, you have two options. One, you can just stitch it and then trim it once it's on and you stitch it together, or you can trim it now. And this will be the method you'd want to do if you're planning on making more of these and you want to know exactly how long this piece is. So to do that, I'm going to line up my pieces here, and I'm going to use the holes as alignment, nice and straight. Make sure the holes are parallel to each other. You can even do it on this side too if you want, but you don't really need to. Okay, so now I have my holes nice and parallel, at least the first side, just like that. And you can see how it overhangs here. So now I'm just going to take a ruler and use the pocket, or use the front panel here as a guide. Just like that. And then I'm going to trim that off. And now we have an even top for the first side of our gusset. And you're going to do the same thing on the other side. Flip it over. Match up your holes. Put down your ruler. Use the edge as a guide. Edge of the front panel as a guide. Double and triple check that it didn't move. And then trim. And there's our gusset. So now, if you want to then make more of these, this is the length of your actual gusset here. Let's see what it is. Comes out to 18 inches basically on the dot. So you remember when we did our measurements, we did 18 and a half, and it ended up being a ½ inch shorter. So we trimmed off basically a ½ inch to get to the final. Okay. So now you are ready to stitch. If you want to glue, if I was doing a production piece, I would put some glue along the sides and then glue everything before stitching because I just want to keep the edge down, especially if you're finishing your edges. But since I'm not doing this, it's just practice, I'm just going to start stitching these together. Okay, so I'm starting my stitch here, front panel to the gusset. I'm going to stitch this off camera. I mean, obviously you just match up the holes and stitch around. I'll do the first side and then we'll come back and look at it before doing the second side. Okay, just finished stitching up the first side. As you can see, all of our holes were evenly marked, so we didn't have any overrun. And now I will stitch on the back and then we'll come back and take a look at our finished stitch product. Okay, so I went ahead and finished stitching up the back. So now I have both sides done. And we have the body of our little pouch with pre-punched stitching holes. And you can see when you do it pre-punched, as long as you keep a nice straight line on your stitching, it just looks really clean on both sides all the way through. Because you know how if you just punch through from the top through both layers, the back can sometimes not look as nice, especially around the corners of the gussets, it gets really tough. Well, these will stay nice and straight and look really even. Okay, so all in all, when you're pre-punching holes for any project, it's a lot more prep work up front, but then once you get moving with your stitching, that process goes a lot faster, I think. So as long as you're okay with trading some upfront prep work for some more speed on the back end of stitching, pre-punching will work out good for you. And if you're going to be doing it for more than one project, you can start doing things like this. So you can, I hope you can see this okay. You can just start, you can then go ahead and pre-punch all the holes on your templates. So even on this paper template here that I used, I just went ahead and pre-punched all my holes. And then you can just go ahead, place your template on, and then mark all of your holes with a scratch awl. And then cut it out, and then you can just punch all your holes through really quickly. So once you do it 1 or 2 times, it gets a little bit quicker. We'll conclude the pre-punching gussets video. If you have any questions, you can put them in the comment section below or email me directly. Thanks for watching.